He was Rome's most powerful man, and its most perverse. Emperor Caligula didn't just break laws, he rewrote them to legalize his own desires. He slept with his sisters, turned his palace into a brothel, and forced senators' wives to serve his guests, all in the name of divine right. At his banquets, husbands were ordered to watch. At his funerals, laughter became a crime. Every act of pleasure was recorded, taxed, and filed like government paperwork. Rome called him a god. His victims called him something worse. If you value the record, subscribe. When the ledgers close, the bones still speak. Behind the marble and gold of the empire, Caligula built a system where intimacy replaced law. His crimes weren't hidden in darkness. They unfolded under candlelight, witnessed by the most powerful men in Rome. He didn't conquer nations. He conquered human dignity. Historians named 5 of his most horrifying acts, each turning private desire into state ritual. But to understand them, we have to see how the system began at his table. The imperial banquet was Rome's most dangerous stage. Every senator, priest, and general who sat there knew that a smile could save his life or end it. Caligula sat at the center, radiant and unreadable. The hall glowed with gold. Musicians played softly, covering the sound of shallow breathing. Witnesses describe a night when he rose from his chair and walked the length of the table. He stopped before a senator's wife. "Stand," he said. She obeyed. He took her hand and led her into a side chamber. The guests froze, staring at their cups. When he returned, she followed, pale and silent. Caligula sat beside her husband and calmly described what had just happened. He compared her to other women, rated her obedience, her composure, her body, as if filing a report. The husband, a senator of Rome, forced himself to laugh. To remain silent was treason. That night, the Senate understood. Caligula didn't need executioners. He could kill a man's honor and make him thank him for it. Before the emperor, there was a child, Gaius Caesar, son of Germanicus, the empire's beloved general. The soldiers adored him, calling him Caligula, Little Boots. He grew up surrounded by loyalty and cheers. Then, his father died suddenly, poisoned, people whispered, by Emperor Tiberius. Within months, Caligula's family was erased. His mother exiled and starved. His brothers tortured to death. And the boy was sent to live with the man everyone believed had murdered them. The island of Capri was paradise in marble, and a cage in disguise. Tiberius ruled by suspicion. Servants vanished overnight. Pleasure and fear existed in the same room. Here, Caligula learned his first law of power: obedience is survival. He watched. He mirrored. He learned to laugh when Tiberius laughed, to flatter when others hesitated. Suetonius would later write, "There was never a better servant, nor a worse master." On Capri, he learned that flattery was armor, and silence was a weapon. He saw that control didn't come from punishment, it came from participation. When Tiberius died, Caligula left the island not as a victim, but as a man who had memorized cruelty. In 37 CE, the Senate crowned him emperor. Rome erupted in joy. He released prisoners, lowered taxes, recalled exiles. Crowds hailed him as the new dawn. For months, he played the part of mercy. Then an illness struck: fever, delirium, hallucinations. When he recovered, the emperor the people loved was gone. He began calling himself Lord and God. Temples were rededicated with his statues. Priests prayed in his name. Senators bowed lower, uncertain when to stop. To most, it looked like madness. To Caligula, it was order. He was testing how far obedience could stretch before it snapped. He made senators kiss his feet. He replaced the heads of gods with his own. Those who hesitated vanished quietly. The boy who once survived by acting now forced the world to act for him. He had discovered that pain wasn't the strongest tool of control. Humiliation was. It didn't just break the body, it reshaped the soul. And once Rome learned to perform obedience, there was no need for chains. What began on the island of Capri as a lesson in survival had now become the empire's most terrifying experiment. A government built on performance, where loyalty was theatre and silence was law. Caligula had learned to rule not through conquest, but through participation, by turning private life into his stage. And soon he would take that theatre even further, rewriting not just the law, but the boundaries of morality itself. Caligula's transformation was complete when his sister died. Among his 3 sisters, Drusilla was the one he loved most, perhaps too much. Ancient writers whispered that she was not just his sister, but his consort. He sat her beside him at banquets, called her the Empress of the East, and demanded that senators treat her as divine. When she fell ill in 38 CE and died, witnesses said the emperor collapsed. But grief for him was never private. It was political. Within hours, he issued an edict that froze the empire in mourning. No one could laugh. No one could bathe, dine, or sing. Markets closed. Musicians were silenced. Even soldiers marched without drums. He declared Drusilla a goddess, Diva Drusilla. Temples were built in her name, priests assigned to her cult. It was Rome's first experiment in emotional control. Grief became mandatory. To disobey was treason. A child who laughed in the street could condemn his family. Merchants who reopened their shops vanished overnight. Caligula didn't need to punish rebellion anymore. He criminalized joy. He was testing a new form of power, the ability to dictate, not just what people did, but how they felt. Every empire can command bodies. Caligula wanted to command hearts. He wanted to see whether the state could own emotion itself. If the Senate could pass laws about taxes and property, why not sorrow? The experiment worked. Fear disguised itself as loyalty. The people mourned, not for Drusilla, but for survival. When the mourning finally ended, Rome exhaled. But the emperor was not done. If he could tax grief, he wondered, could he also tax desire? Soon after, the next decree arrived. The imperial palace would now serve as Rome's most exclusive brothel, not for slaves or courtesans, but for the daughters and wives of senators. Heralds shouted the announcement through the streets. Appointments would be made by the treasury. Prices were posted publicly. Every noble family in Rome froze. Caligula had discovered the perfect weapon: shame. He could ruin a man's honor without spilling a drop of blood. Each woman's name was written in ledgers, each visit logged, each payment collected by imperial clerks. The same accountants who once recorded taxes now recorded humiliation. The emperor sat behind a curtain, observing, taking notes. To him, this was administration, not pleasure. He had turned intimacy into bureaucracy. Every act of obedience produced revenue. Every payment proved submission. Even the senators who despised him funded the system, because their fear was worth more than their pride. At the end of each week, Caligula demanded the records read aloud. Names, dates, sums, all recited like financial reports. It wasn't lust, it was audit. Rome's morality had become a spreadsheet. A senator could lose his fortune and still survive. But once his daughter's name appeared on that list, he was finished. The empire had found the most efficient punishment possible, a man destroyed by his own silence. The brothel was only one part of the experiment. Caligula wanted to test obedience in public. He began turning his banquets into performances, trials disguised as celebrations. Each feast was a rehearsal for survival. The guests, senators and generals, sat frozen in their seats while the emperor roamed the room. He would stop before a man's wife, smile, and lead her away. Everyone knew what that meant. When he returned, he described everything that had happened. The husband had to laugh, to nod, to toast, because not reacting was rebellion. Witnesses wrote that no blood was spilled, yet men left those dinners broken. Caligula's cruelty was precise. He didn't kill his enemies. He made them watch themselves decay. He forced them to act grateful while being humiliated. It was the perfect system, one where the victim confirmed his own defeat. Seneca, who lived through those years, later wrote, "Tyranny survives not by fear, but by theatre." Caligula understood that better than anyone. He had built a government of actors, men trained to smile, applaud, and forget. Every night ended the same way. The scribes took notes. Who smiled? Who hesitated? Who cried? Emotion became data. Rome's bureaucracy had merged with performance. Then came his cruelest experiment. He began inviting families of condemned men to dinner. A father whose son had been executed in the morning would find himself seated beside the emperor that night. Wine poured, food served. The father had to eat, to act normal, while Caligula watched. No one dared to speak. Tears were forbidden. To grieve was to admit disloyalty. A single sigh could mean death. One historian described a father who survived such a dinner, only to die the next day, his heart giving out. Caligula didn't have to kill him. He had forced the man to erase his own grief. By then, Rome understood the rules. Emotion itself had become evidence. Love, loyalty, even sorrow, all could be used against you. The emperor had turned the heart into a weapon. He no longer needed prisons or torture. He had discovered something far more powerful. That if you could control what people felt, you could control everything else. And by the time the Senate realized what he had built, it was too late. They had already become part of the experiment. By the 4th year of his rule, Caligula believed he was untouchable. He had survived conspiracies, plagues, and every attempt at reason. The Senate feared him. The people obeyed. Only the soldiers still remembered what honor meant. Among them was Cassius Chaerea, an officer of the Praetorian Guard. He was disciplined, older, and proud. Caligula mocked him daily, calling him weak, ridiculing his voice, assigning him passwords like Venus or kisses just to humiliate him in front of his men. Every laugh left a scar. Chaerea waited, silent, until patience turned into resolve. On January 24th, 41 CE, Caligula attended a theatre performance near the palace. Afterward, he took a private passage that connected the stage to his residence. It was narrow, dimly lit, lined with marble. The guards followed, as always. At the end of the corridor stood Chaerea. As the emperor approached, he demanded the day's password. Caligula smirked and whispered another insult, a final one. Before the echo faded, Chaerea drew his sword and struck upward, piercing beneath the ribs. The emperor gasped, but didn't cry out. More blades followed. Within seconds, the man Rome once called a god lay bleeding on the floor. 30 wounds, 30 answers to 4 years of humiliation. Outside, confusion spread through the palace. Some soldiers fled, others began looting. Caligula's wife and young daughter were found and killed to erase his bloodline. The empire had decapitated its tyrant, but not its system. That night, Rome was silent. The Senate gathered at dawn, trembling, unsure whether to celebrate or hide. Some called for the restoration of the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard had already made its choice. While senators debated freedom, soldiers searched the palace and found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain. He was middle-aged, lame, stuttering, and harmless. Perfect. They lifted him on their shoulders and declared him emperor, not out of loyalty, but necessity. The empire could not exist without a head. The machine needed an operator. By sunset, Claudius was crowned. The Senate bowed again, just as they had to Caligula. Nothing had changed except the tone of the commands. Claudius acted quickly. He ordered Caligula's name erased from monuments and decrees. The Senate called it justice. But the real goal was to make the killing look legal. Cassius Chaerea, the man who ended the tyrant, was executed within weeks. His death proved that Rome's first loyalty was not to justice, but to continuity. Under Claudius, the empire became quieter, smoother, more procedural. The cruelty didn't vanish. It was reorganized. The public brothel closed, but the taxes remained, renamed palace contributions. The mourning edict disappeared, but emotional control returned as propaganda. Fear turned into paperwork. What Caligula did through spectacle, Claudius did through policy. Every reform carried the same principle: obedience disguised as order. Officials filed reports, stamped decrees, and told themselves they were restoring peace. In truth, they were perfecting the same machinery that had created Caligula. Rome no longer needed a monster. It had habits. Historians called Caligula insane. It was safer than admitting he was logical. He had proven that power could survive without conscience, as long as procedure remained. Claudius only refined the formula. Under him, executions required paperwork. Confiscations came with signatures. The empire's cruelty had learned to speak the language of administration. The senators who once dreamed of liberty now feared irrelevance more than death. They signed every law, approved every edict, and told themselves they were civilized. Caligula was gone, but his method endured. He had discovered that obedience could outlive the tyrant. That once people learn to perform submission, they no longer need to be forced. Rome called it peace. But it was the peace of exhaustion, the silence that follows habit. When later emperors, Nero, Domitian, Commodus, revived his cruelty, they didn't invent anything new. They simply reopened the theatre he had built, with new costumes and the same script. Because what Caligula left behind was not madness. It was design, a system that turned emotion into control and obedience into survival. And that system would rule Rome for centuries.